Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Lawvere, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. I'm joined today by special guest Matt Martin of Vehement Knives. He has a very strong social media presence, is a super knife maker, and I'm really honored to have him on the show today. Matt, welcome.
What's happening, Aaron? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So for everybody who doesn't know you, Matt, can you give a brief history of you on the personal level and then like what got you into knives?
Yeah, I mean, the two are pretty closely intermingled, really. But I I really got into professional knife making around 2008, and I'm a maker by nature. I come from a lineage of makers, just tinkerers. You know, we make everything in our household. The joke's been said the only new stuff I even own is stuff I've made because I buy everything else secondhand and fix it. So it wasn't long before I started dabbling in knives. Super passionate about it. It's one of those like the scene in the Magnificent Seven. I think it's Britt who throws that switchblade in the gunfight. You know, that's pretty strong impression on a little kid. Watch, wow, man, that was cool. And knife culture, Rambo obviously was big when I was a kid, so I was always into it. So it was a matter of time before I got into making them. And tinkered with it for a little while, and then I had a career as a contractor in the unexploded ordnance field. I was a UXO tech, we were called, and traveled the world like Uncle Sam's garbage man, picking up bombs and making them go away that left around on ranges and stuff like that. I was still making knives when I'd be home then. You know, I wouldn't be home about 6 weeks a year and not consecutively. So as one contract would end, I'd come home and then I'd leave again. And sometimes I'd be gone for a year at a time or, 6 months, whatever. Um, and so I would come home and I'd make knives and I'd take them to my crew, which they're contractors. So they kind of scatter to the wind when a contract's up. And we owe a huge amount of our current success to the EOD UXO community because they proliferated our brand like out the gates kind of organically. So when my wife said, it's time for you to come home and we're going to have to figure something else out because she didn't want me on the road. Our daughter was getting older. They couldn't come visit on domestic job sites anymore. And so she's like, you got to come home. I said, well, let's try giving this knife making thing a shot, full time. So we were selling knives as early as probably 2008. And then in 2013, this will be my 10th year in December. I walked off my last grid job in chest deep snow at Lowry Bomb and Gunnery Range, the former Fleaburger, anybody who knows that, former Lowry Bomb and Gunnery Range. It was 19 below, and some office shuffling went around where team leader said, hey, do you want to take off and go pursue your career at this very moment? And I looked at the boss, the senior UXO officer. I said, are we good? He said, any job anywhere in the world. I said, okay, cool. Then I'm out of here. And that was it. I drove home and my wife, Jenna, met me in the driveway of our house and handed me a beer before I even got out of the Jeep, and I slammed it, and that was it. And so then I was a full-time knife maker, man. And that is it's a pretty harrowing experience. It's very free, like I get to pick what 100 hours a week I work. That's pretty nice, I guess. But I kind of have a little bit of command over my own destiny, and I think having that agency is a whole hell of a lot better than having to tug on someone's pant leg when you want to take a leak. And so yeah, that's other than that, like I enjoy long walks on the beach. And I'm avid motorcyclist. I love jeeping. I love being outdoors, but I love being outdoors with a motor around me also. So yeah, that's pretty much.
So what would you say like your largest inspiration is? Because I've looked at your work for quite a while now, and I really dig the like Vietnam era of or style of blades that you make. But like where does like your inspiration start, and what got you into like the current aesthetic that you have today?
I mean, it's That's a pretty multifaceted answer, I suppose. War blades were cheap growing up, right? You know what I mean? And so my grandfather, who I just lost earlier this year, would frequently take me to the surplus store to get camping gear, and he would usually, give me a knife or something like that, or he would order from one of the catalogs back in the day, and so I just kind of, or even at swap meets and whatnot. So they were abundant, right? So you get these war knives that were pretty abundant. They all had a story. And then as I got older, there was something in, and I mean, you can talk to service members today, and they'll agree with this. A majority of them, at the very least. But there's something very inspiring about some of the world-changing feats that took place, ensconced in leather and metal and wood. And there was, even though it was considered technology at the time, the things that these guys had, by today's standards, it was pretty crude. The same way a club would have been technology to a caveman, but by today's standards would be, equally primitive. So that inspiration of this wood, leather, metal concept and my obsession. Now, even though our company is named Vehement Knives, which implies a certain level of passion, right? That's intensely passionate. That's a euphemism for probably what would be an unhealthy obsession. This isn't something I want to do. This is something compulsory. This is something I have to do. So you get the idea. Sometimes the inspiration will come from a video game. Sometimes, the white whale I was chasing as a younger maker was the fit and finish of Buster Warkenski or Bob Loveless, even. You know what I mean? Even Steve Johnson and Jim Merritt. A lot of coming out of the Loveless shop. You had these just flawless, flowing knives with this kind of captivating design. So you kind of juxtapose those two on there, like the inspirational side of old, antique military aesthetic mixed with this obsessive need to have everything just so, but not overly complicated. In our knives, we use primarily, I mean, 99% of the time we use micarta because it's a practical material, versus I, I would rather be recognized as a good knife maker by using the most banal raw materials than be applauded as a great knife maker, with uneven grinds, loose finish, whatever, because I used some exotic handle material or bolster or guard material. So I basically lit any potential laurels on fire underneath me. So I had to just constantly strive to get everything as tight and right as I could with as little embellishment as possible. And so that's, I would say those are, the three prong attack. It's the obsession, the fact that I'm cursed with an eye for detail. It does produce a better product, but it's a very frustrating albatross around my neck because it means I see the world in a very small scale. Um, and then of course, kind of the inspiration. You'll see a lot of our kind of throwback war blades, just because, man, if these guys could do it wearing leather soled shoes, then hell, there's not much that I can't do in my day to day living, right?
It's interesting that you have an eye for the past and think aesthetically about simplicity, right? And I agree, like holistically, that you should be able to take very simple materials and turn those into beautiful things before you worry about taking things like rare materials and turning those into beautiful things. Because I think so often people think that, well, I'll use Damascus or I'll use mammoth ivory or something like that and produce a knife that's desirable or sellable simply because of the materials that are in it. But for me, it's almost like slapping lipstick on a pig. Like if you if you really spend the time on the fundamentals, that knife should speak volumes to the craftsmanship versus having all those the doodads. You know what I mean?
100%. It falls into the second half of the you can either blind them with brilliance or baffle them with BS. You know what I mean? And I couldn't agree more. And I see a lot of guys that have tremendous potential and bright futures ahead of them, but they get so attached to whiz-bang materials. And I'm sorry, like Damascus doesn't make the knife. Mokume doesn't make the knife. Damascus doesn't make the knife. You make the knife. The maker makes the knife. And I wish there was in this social media culture, in our industry, maybe across all industries, less about popularity and more about hard-earned quality. Because when things get rocky, a lot of these makers, it's very unfortunate. Like I say, they have bright potential, but I watch their followership kind of vaporize because it's it's undermined a little bit. It doesn't have, it's an inverted pyramid versus a conventional pyramid. And you have to build on those fundamentals before you can, kind of like you alluded to, start embellishing an already well cultivated skill set with exotic materials versus the other way around. Hey, the pros are doing this, I'm going to do that. Yeah, you sell a couple knives up front, but the bubble bursts inevitably.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's I've suffered from that too in some ways because I mean I work a day job, and I've had the the blessed ability to work on my craft, like working on the quality of my knives without having to make a customer suffer for that, right? So like
Right.
my entry into the market was with a pretty good knife, right? I mean, I didn't I sold some to like friends and family, but for the most part, I spent most of my time out here tinkering and making things and working on finishes and prototyping things that I wanted to do, and it wasn't something that I charged anybody for. And so now, now I get into the market where I joined the guild, I'm going to shows and everything, and there is it's not the same culture around accepting makers if they are already good walking into the industry, as if they like as if people saw them when they were struggling and started out. I like for me, I don't have a humongous following and a lot of like a large customer base, simply because I kind of just stepped onto the scene making a pretty good quality knife. And I've noticed at least that it's slow going to build up the social media and the customer base and everything, doing all of that behind closed doors.
To get a little inside baseball, I guess, but I guess that's the point of this whole podcast. But really, I mean, I can definitely understand your perception from your perspective, and I have a just a ton of sympathy for makers, good makers, trying to make it today in social media. Now that the TV shows, Knife or Death, Forged in Fire, and stuff have come out, obviously the knife making culture has grown with it in popularity, and then you mix social media into that, and holy cow, is it difficult to separate the wheat from the chaff. I mean, there is just so many people, there are so many people vying for that recognition. And it is, I mean, it's as random as catching Elvis's handkerchief now. You know what I mean? It's really something. And I feel really bad. I think I got in at a good time because it was in the forum days, and it just didn't, you couldn't promote yourself as easily as you can today. So there's a lot of noise, background noise when trying to make your brand. But the antidote to that, and I tell a lot of up and coming makers now who are trying to get a foothold in the marketplace, is the quality of knife. And this kind of goes hand in hand with your point, is people want to get in on the ground level. Well, that ground level is it's culture. So it's culture building. And what I mean by that is this personal investment that the customer has with your brand. They either they see you begin from the ground floor, or they align with your values, or you share common interests as far as, exotic hobbies or whatever. But it's culture is the number one thing. If you don't want to play the algorithm gang or game, and you don't want to have to do the right hashtags to get the right people to look at your stuff, then what you need to do is you need to find a couple like-minded people. Never chase anything. Don't try to chase the trends. You'll always be behind. Stick to your guns, and the right customers will show up that align with your values, and promote that positive. And some people even promote a negative culture. There's brands out there that are outside of knives, but knife adjacent, that promote a negative culture, and that works for them. They gather a lot of trolls. It's not a way I would go about it, but it's worked for them over the years. In our case, we promoted a very positive, very transparent culture. And through that, we gained supporters, which is a term that we use to kind of flip the bird to social media. Instead of calling them followers, we gained supporters. And through doing that, that allowed us to rise, and at the same time produce the best level of quality that we can at the same time. But I would say culture is the number one way. If you want to grow your social media presence, then there needs to be something more than just the product. People love being a part of something, and if that means following you from your day one, I'm going to walk out here and film me make my very first knife, or if that means that you're already an accomplished maker and show up on the scene and say, this is what I'm all about, you're going to draw people.
Yeah, and well, I think like observationally, like I love your company culture, but talking to you, being able to talk to your wives, hearing about the people who admire you and your work, and also looking at your customers, you can really tell the quality of people, right? And what I mean by that is that you have vehement followers and supporters, right? I mean, they love your product, they love what you stand for, and they share that actively. Like if you look at anything, I mean, I'm sure you do, but if the listener base looks at Matt's Facebook page, like everybody is posting stuff like every day. There is something that they are doing that where they're living vehemently, and that to me is very impressionable. It's like the knives is like a side thing, right? It's that community, that brotherhood or whatever that people want to be a part of. And I find myself at times, if I'm like watching like your Facebook group and everything like that, I'm like, man, like that's pretty cool. I want to be a part of that too.
Absolutely. Like, and it happened so organically. We're really fortunate because we just kind of let it all hang out, and the right people showed up. Because I can say whatever I want. If we had a bunch of a-holes walk through the door, that's who you're saddled with. And then you're going to be constantly, fighting drama on Facebook or something like that. And instead, like, just these amazing people, from the days that we were making $200 knives to today we're making $2,000 knives. Like, it's the right people showed up, and like, I don't know, man. Like, they took the torch from my hand and ran with it, and this amazing community kind of sprang up. And I hate to just keep waxing on about it, but they did it. We opened the door, and they came inside and made it a party. And it's a party where everybody's having fun, and it's pretty inclusive. It's free of politics. It's free of BS. And, we've had to swing around an iron fist maybe twice in the last 10 years, really, that we've been on Facebook. So, yeah, that's it. And there's times, Aaron, where I get in there and I'm like, man, I want to be a part of this. Like, wow, look at these guys are doing crazy things, and
Yeah,
then you realize, you're like, oh my God,
yeah, but for like I don't know, observationally, that comes from you, right? Like every time I've talked to you, you're just like full of like woohoo, right? Like you exude positivity, support, guidance, and I think that when people get enough of that and know that there's like a I don't know, in this age of like kind of woke culture or whatever, it's like safe spaces has sometimes a negative or wimpy connotation. But in this manner, I really feel like even as myself and as a fan of yours, I feel safe in this space where you can like talk about ideas, you can share failures and things, and it's accepted, and it's accepted because it's a normal part of human progression. And that's something like to for you, like I never feel like I'm coming with you with anything like maybe it's a stupid question, but you're like, no, 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 that's actually a really good idea. Like like let me substantiate this for you, and then let's build on this idea together.
That's I Aaron, honestly, I think that's because making is really important to me. And it's fundamentally important to humankind, and even historically speaking, you know what I mean? So it's so important to me that, like, I abhor gatekeeping. I can't stand it. Like when or snarky comments, or whatever. I really can't stand it because we're all on the same path. We all started in the same garage with the same single incandescent light bulb, solitarily hanging above our heads, casting a shadow everywhere we stood. This is a very equal playing field. And at this point, I have to look that, oh my God, I can't believe, I've been doing this for 15 years now. I mean, it went by in the blink of an eye. Well, I learned a lot of things in 15 years. And if I want to see the next generation of makers continue this amazing, vital craft of humanity, although it's a little bit in effigy now, let's be honest, but it's still important. If I want to see them go further, why do I want to watch them, step in the same pitfalls that I went through? I want to see everybody carry the torch farther. Let's get through the basics, what I consider the basics, or whatever my experience is, whatever level any maker's at, whatever level you're at when you call and like, hey, how do I do this or whatever. Like, I want to share that so that you can skip the learning curve. And my biggest hope is that you go farther, so long as you share your learning curve with the next generation. You know what I mean? So I think it's so fundamentally important to me that I it's worth passing that down. It's worth providing, and I understand the connotation. Make people feel comfortable. Make them come out of their shell. Make them feel more adventurous in the things that they're doing. That's important.
Yeah, I mean, they say that there are no stupid, that the only stupid question is the one that you don't ask. And I'm okay. I'm the kind of guy that's like, no, there are legitimately stupid questions. Like, don't get me wrong. However, everybody asks stupid questions. And unless you feel comfortable asking them, and unless you feel comfortable acknowledging that there is inherent ignorance and things like that in your worldview, right?
Right.
Unless you accept that, then how are you going to grow? That's not just a knife anecdote. It's like a life one. And to me, like, knives are so philosophical because I learn stuff about myself, the mantle of who I am, every time I go out into the shop. Every time I say I'm not going to go out in the shop, every time I'm maybe a little bit judgy of somebody's work, I'm like, man, like I feel bad about myself doing certain things, and it's all related to like what happens within knives. So I've grown a lot as a person in this craft because I think it's allowed me to be more forgiving, more accepting, and also more encouraging towards other makers. Because that's also what I want. It's like the golden rule of do unto others. Well, that's something that is very felt for me in knives.
Totally. And you could take that to a car show, where you've got these guys that have $80,000 builds, and you have the, shade tree mechanic who just built his first hot rod, and it could be rough around the edges, but you'd be like, hey man, that's amazing. I can see how much work you put into this and that you're so passionate about it. So yeah, I mean, I could carry across any walk of life, whether you're at a bar, a deli, or wherever. It's just a little bit of sympathy. I don't even know if sympathy is the right word, but just understanding of effort, and particularly understanding of effort when it comes to creation. Because I'll tell you what, dude, it's effing hard to make something from nothing. it takes a lot mentally, it takes a lot emotionally when it doesn't go right. And physically, though, this is the least physical job I've ever had as far as a vocation goes. I'm starting to develop problems in my hands, man. You know what I mean? So it does take its toll. You're on your feet, for 10, 12 hours a day. I don't even sit down in my shop, but not for any process other than engraving, I guess, when I'm screwing around with that, just because I like to have as much stability as possible. But uh, yeah, it's I don't know. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, and I think you are getting the most out of this that you possibly can, because I tell you what, awards, accolades, yes, they are achievements, but there's a very hollow, post accolade letdown like the minute that's over. So if that's all you're striving for, those are very empty steps that you're taking versus, kind of savoring the whole craft and really, making something from nothing as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, there's the economics of knives, right? So I'm a knife maker. I make knives. They cost money. I try to sell them to be able to recoup the cost to make more knives, right? But honestly, there's a portion of me like because I vacillate with sales. I vacillate with popularity. My life with our daughter, because she's a heart transplant kid, my family gets top priority, right? So maybe I'll like I'll say okay, like I can update social media a little bit, but really honestly, my time in the shop is limited because I got family priorities, and that's most important to me. Um, even with all that being said, sales are not the accolade for me, even though that's like important to be able to feed the beast. Awards I don't really care about, and even sometimes like how many likes you get on social media is not a definitive measure of you as a person or your work. Because I know, man, I know a lot of really good knife makers that have a very very light social media presence, yet they sell as much as they want to, they're happy with their work, and they're incredible makers. And so I guess it's like trying to find that, what does validation look like to you? And if it's vapid, then probably looks towards things that are more substantive, because that I think that's what carries us through the craft on those during those low times, is to really find something to dig into. And it might not always be that everybody else has an opinion about your work. You know what I mean?
Totally. And like when it comes to validation, I mean, when I see members of our Facebook group, I'm going to do a plug. It's a pretty small group. Our page, like our Facebook page, has got a handful of likes. I mean, that's pretty respectable, I think. But our group is only like 3,000 people or something like that. And but when I see these guys helping each other out without me as a mediator in any way, somebody uh, gets a new job or has a baby and somebody sends them one of our knives out of their personal collection, or even just something nice, but because they made this relationship through the group and share these, morals or outlook on life, whatever it is. When I see that happening, when I see random acts of kindness under our umbrella, then I say, oh, that's that's validation. That feels good, and then you get these messages back. And this isn't, I'm not trying to self-aggrandize it. This is real. This happens where I get these thank you messages. Thank you for opening up this space and creating this atmosphere where we can have, such good friends and connections. And I go, oh, that is a lot better than a brass plaque. Like, I don't care who you are. That is a much more substantial feeling than, having a piece of acrylic on your work, on your desk.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So like last year, my stepdaughter, she lost her child. She was born prematurely, or early, and we lost her. And I was making some knives and like populating them to try to just raise some money for her for medical expenses, and just to help support her and her partner while they were going through everything. And like Alex Harrison and Jeffrey Mitchell and Dutch and a few other people were like, "Hey, like, do you need some help with this?" And donated knives, and we created a little auction site, and we shared it everywhere. And we were able to raise a few grand for them in that time of need and everything. And it meant a lot to me because I think it was the first time where, like, unsolicited, the knife community really reached out in a time where it was difficult for the family, and we could just like shower my daughter with a little bit of support and acknowledgement that her loss is great for her and everything. And I left that kind of experience just being very impressed by us as a knife community. And so anytime like cause raffles or things like that come up, I try to, if I have like something extra on my desk, to help contribute towards that. Because I mean, what better way to support each other than crowdsourcing, right? And what it's more powerful than the best insurance policy, or things like that, or money in the bank account. Like, I mean, really honestly, having the support of all these people, it's situational and it's very powerful.
It is, and it really it transcends the dollar amount too, because it just sends this very loud and clear message of, hey, you're not alone. We've got you. This is the only thing we could think to do because it's our specialty. So here are knives to raise money. But the reality is you, the recipient has this kind of warm blanket around them, like, we've got you, and they don't feel alone. That's the ultimate goal. And the dollar amount is the dollar amount, depending on how things shake out. But the overall, I tell you what, it is like almost close to being like a tangible manifestation of thoughts and prayers. You know what I mean? And I'm using quotes for that. But this is action. This is people taking action and people saying, "Hey, we're behind you," and that's pretty powerful. That gives people, sometimes all they need is the encouragement to take the next step, because they're so laden with whatever's going on in their world, whatever tragedy is hitting. And once they take that next step, and man, the momentum can start, and they can, resume life, and hopefully on a positive tangent. So yeah, I think crowdsourcing, I think the knife community as a whole, even outside of the syndicate and whatnot, I I've been on both ends, Aaron. I supply, and I'm sorry that I missed yours. I don't spend nearly enough time on social media to even be aware of a lot of stuff, but I can tell you we supply a fair amount. Almost dropped an S bomb right there. We supply a fair amount of good cause raffle knives and donation knives, a significant amount. We'll even go that far, because hey, man, if you have the ability, you have the responsibility, and we want to continue to do our part to a community that's been so good to us for the last 15 years.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have a lot of my respect for that. I mean, man, I don't know what to say, because it's there's a lot of times when I don't think that people have the answers to like what they're going to do next, especially when finances are a thing. And in a small way, where we can crowdsource that, to me, that's a big deal. Because I've been blessed that money has not been the primary driver for a little while now. Although it does, I guess it doesn't matter how much money you make, you could always find ways to spend it. But I've always been able to put clothes on my kids' backs and food in their mouths and a roof over their head. And so for me, those are like the essentials, and everything else is like, how do we find ways to take what we earn, and what we're blessed with, and turn that into blessings for other people. And one of those ways obviously is knives for me. So like I'm all on board with that whenever there's a good cause that comes up. So it's really just turning that same momentum that I've had in my life around, and trying to help others with it as well.
It feels good. Jason Toon at DLT, he's our sole DLT trading. He's our DLTtrading.com. He's our sole distributor, by design. I had several, and I ended up paring back because it was just easier to feed one mouth. And through that relationship, we became good friends. And he's a little very, sometimes the wisest phrase is the simplest, right? In a very Mark Twain kind of way. But he's like, when you're a kid, you like getting stuff. And when you're an adult, that you get that same feeling from giving stuff. And there's just a lot of truth in that. And we just really, it's been a rough year. We had I lost my grandfather in January, and then in February, I lost my dear friend Todd Walensky of True Saber Knives, and it was unexpected. Everybody had just been talking to him, as recent as that day, and that was the end of his living story. And his wife was saddled with they had just been married for a couple of years, and she wanted to give him an honorable send off, and the bill came in to $13,000, if I'm not mistaken. And the knife community came together through To the Edge, which is a nonprofit that I'm co whatever, I don't know. It's me and Jake Mahler. But To the Edge, he did all this work for it. But through his work and the kindness of so many knife makers and the unyielding support of the community as a whole, we're able to completely cover Todd's funeral expenses. Yeah,
Well,
and
that's
that was
cool.
a big bill. That was a big deal. And everybody showed up not because I was there, not because there was any brand power or anything like that. Everybody showed up because Todd was a great guy, and because that is the type of character that the best part of the knife community is made of.
Yeah. No, that's super cool. I mean, even in the eyes of tragedy and everything, there's small like whispers of relief that come in, and man, it's good to be a part of that, but it's good to see that, and I think that's part. I mean, I don't know. Knives are knives, right? Like other crafts are other crafts, yeah. But that the human condition, the the spirituality, faith, belief, and reliance, not only from a religious perspective, but also as a like a human compassion and everything. To me, is just that's where it's at. At the end of the day, we're people. Like a knife is a knife, but it's made by a person,
Oh, and
and
we're weird people. Like this is a land of misfit toys. I mean, that's
yeah.
that's why there's so many different walks of life in the knife community. Everything from congressmen to you know recovering drug addicts, which sometimes are the same person. Even you know what I mean. But it's because we all. It's my belief, anyways. This is just my opinion, not in any way substantiated fact by research. But we're all a little weird. We're all a little socially misfit, and there is comfort being around other weirdos, even if they're a completely different flavor. I mean, we are a soda fountain of bizarre personality types.
Yeah, but that keeps it interesting, right? I I really like talking to people. Like I have the gift of gab, I guess. And I just like it's fascinating to me just to be able to talk to people, get to know them, and then also figure out where we align or misalign, whether it's knives or politics or things like that. Like I mean, really, I'm a no holds barred type of guy. But really, what at the end of the day, I really like to just know a person because it gives me a lot of empathy for them to be able to put myself in their shoes and walk for a while. And whether you have an errant scratch on your blade or not, to me, sometimes doesn't matter so much. It's like, okay, well, were you under the gun when you got that thing, or like, yeah, I don't know, like it's like the reasons behind things that I'm interested in, not so much that it happened, but how did it happen, you know what I
There's
mean?
a story. Every scratch has a story. Every little detail is. Yeah, I totally agree. And like you, I actually would rather talk to somebody who doesn't share my opinions, because that's how you see further in the world. You know what I mean? That's how you get light shed on dark corners. versus the echo chamber of the social media networks that, you're only surrounded by people who agree with you. And that I don't really get down on sycophantism. You know what I mean? So that's, yeah, no, and having so many diverse walks of life allows you to broaden your horizons. Hey, man, that's cool that you support that. Tell me why. What's your reasoning? Maybe I can understand it better. Maybe I don't even know that I support your belief in whatever it is yet until you shed some light on
Yeah. Well, kind of going back to a comment that you made about gatekeepers, I share the same kind of sentiment. I really hate uh, I really hate everything that seems to have some glass ceiling to it, and for one reason or another, people feel like it's appropriate to hold people back in one way or another because of some reason,
it.
right?
Insecurity.
Like,
Insecurity is the reason. I don't mean to cut you off here, but that's the reason solely.
yeah, no, I mean, and like I agree. I also think it's the machine too, because I know some strong knife makers who are very just in every other way, shape, and form. They're just really great. But then there's this side where like you don't want to praise somebody too much because you don't want them to get a big ego, or don't want them to surpass you or whatever. And on the ego side, like for me, I will always temper a certain portion of my praise with the reality that there's always ways that you can improve, right?
Right.
And so I mean, I have no problem with if somebody wants to show me their work, for instance, telling them, well, these are things that are really great about it. But it's like the ego side of it is something that I don't care about, because I think that is I think that's it weeds itself out, where if you get praise and you take it the wrong way and you stagnate, and then you die off because you got so like overwhelmed with the praise that you just stopped advancing, then it's a self-solving problem, right? I'm looking to encourage people and allow them to allow that nurturing to continue to spur them on, not to not that I care. It's like once it leaves my mouth, once that, like, if I can be positive about things, it's in their ear. What they do with it after that is like the continuation of that gift, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. I tell you, critiquing knives is my least favorite thing to do. Now, like on a guild technical committee, I would appreciate the position, and I wouldn't have as hard a time as new maker saying, "Hey, tell me what you think about my work." And sometimes it's so rough that it would require an overhaul, but you don't want to impart that because it would be discouraging, right? You know what I mean? So you try to find things, or at the very least present them with solutions to things that you can tell they're trying but struggling with. The things they don't see, there may not be. Yeah, and I'm talking about new makers where plunges are crooked, grind lines are convex, flat, uneven, and it was finished with asphalt. When it becomes too much, you just want to encourage them to stick with it. And I've kind of coined a phrase, accidentally, if we were just hanging out at a knife event, and I put it to him this way. So this is how, like, in your example, this is how I temper praise with kind of giving them, planting the seed to go further and keep going. And I just say, look, man, I mean, the difference between a decent knife and a great knife is the last 6 hours you spend on it, the last 4 to 6 hours you spend on it. You can roughly gnaw anything out that's knife shaped, but if you really want to get better, then vector in on every surface and every transition between planes, and kind of work on perfecting that. And you can chase it with a zen like patience for the rest of your life and never achieve it. You know what I mean? But what a ride. I mean, that's a fun place to be, because you get to look back to your catalog and see how far you've come. But yeah, that's how I impart that. I just tell them, I say, look, man, the only difference between a decent knife and a great knife is the last 4 to 6 hours you spend on it.
Yeah, and if you only spend 3 hours on it, then maybe it's the last 60 minutes. But kind of to that point, I think it also has a lot to do with like when you're giving feedback, that you can break knife making apart into several different segments, right? Like the fundamentals of knife making are like blade design, profiling, and heat tree, right? So like do you have, and bevel grinding, right? Like do you have the fundamentals down where you know, like symmetry, for instance? Like symmetry is something that you can fix if you can lay out your work properly, right? If you're
Yes, yeah,
yeah,
layout.
like there are some pretty, they're pretty straightforward or rudimentary things that you can do to fix it. So as long as you're on the right path with your, like your blade, like your bevel grinding, you can usually just give somebody a little bit of a bump here or there and say, hey, maybe think about this instead, and fixable. Like design, man, I've seen some real awful blade designs, and it's like from
They're out
yeah,
there.
from start to finish, I'm just like, I just don't know how practical this is. But in general, I'll take a step back and say, hey man, like maybe like the fundamentals are there, like your profile looks good and things like that. Maybe you want to think inside of that, the fundamentals about your pattern, right? Or your profile or whatever. And I can kind of break it down from there, where it's not being super critical, but it's giving them a little bit more granularity around the basics of knife making. But then when you get into like, when you have a buddy who's kind of like, hey, tell me what you think about this thing, and you're like, man, the knife is mostly good, but if you want me to really like pick it apart, there's gaps in your handle material somewhere, or I can see pins in your bolsters, or your solder joint's not really that great, or you left previous grit scratches here and here. You can even give them ideas on how to problem solve. But at some point in time, like knife making is really about saying, I want to make this thing, and then you have to problem solve your way through the entire experience, right?
Every
And
blade.
yeah, and yeah, I mean, it's not just learning and getting to an echelon where you do that with everything. It's like every single iteration of whatever you're making always is a process of learning. And if you're not learning something, then you're stagnating. Like I started getting into pocket knives a few years back, and I've kind of slowly been ramping that up. But pocket knives is like, especially the spring knife or slip joint mechanism, is a completely different beast than just doing a fixed blade. Not saying that they're not fundamentals about knife making that don't translate to both, but it's just a different thing that you have to focus on when you're thinking about a mechanism and certain standards of fit and finish.
Yeah, I mean, you get to argue that that's like car versus motorcycle. Yeah, they're both conveyances. Yeah, they both have internal combustion engines, but oh my goodness, the challenges are vastly different between the two. Yeah, no, I there's that's folders, man. That is, yeah, we have this queue, like our order list, and this isn't even like humble brag. This is an albatross hanging around my neck. We reopened the books up and got overwhelmed, and it's difficult for me to experiment outside of. I mean, this is my full time job. I go home and I make other stuff on my time off, or go do things. So the shop time 24/7 when it was my part time job, or not 24/7, but the late nights or whatever, those are reserved kind of for special occasions. I'm dying to get through this order list, which is just slowly getting there. But to start experimenting with folders, I have got lockback designs that I am just dying to turn into real things, and I've started amassing little tools. Tyler Turner was kind enough to hook me up with some literature on the subject, and so I'm just chomping at the bit to get there. And it's still a sore spot for me because I'm like, how have I not been able to make the time to do this? And then I remember, oh yeah, I am making other kinds of knives the other 12 hours a day. So yeah, that's one of those things. But
Yeah. So on when we were talking with Alex, he was we went over his I forget what he calls it, his war wash, right? And that it was a play on your tiger lips. Can you give me a little bit of background, like why did you name it Tiger Lips, and what made you think about like doing this form of like etch finish that you did? Like, I mean, what's the story behind it?
This is the dumbest story ever. So this, it started off. We had a knife called the Vehemently, kind of the amalgamation, a bastardization of our name and something large, right? So this is one of our earlier designs. It was a recurved Tonto. It was just kind of ridiculous in all aspects. Neat, and you could definitely tell where my head was. This was in like the zombie apocalypse craze before everything turned lime green, but not long before, right? So I'm like, oh man, this is cool, And so I made this big crazy knife, and I wanted to impart some kind of like really battle scarred. This was the last knife on earth, and it's obviously it's chopped through Buicks and every kind of steel institution door to get in and scavenge the food that was left behind. And so I wanted this kind of worn finish beyond just throwing it in a tumbler. So you see like Kiko Matsuda's work, and he has this more artistic, obviously an acid and a resist to create this pattern on there. And I'm like, well, I wonder if I can adapt that to make this look kind of battle scarred. So I did that, and eventually I did a like a Mac VSOG style 6-inch knife, Ben Baker type. And in doing that, I was like, well, I'm going to kind of stretch these scars out and make kind of a Vietnam era tiger stripe pattern. So on the Behemoth, it was called Apocalypse Wash. That was back in, I don't know, it was probably 14 years ago, maybe. Or no, not 14, probably, oh, geez, maybe it was. It's been a while. Anyways, so hang on, I'm plugging my phone in because it just told me I'm at 5%. And I'm hoping that this charger works. Yep, we're good. So because that was called Apocalypse Wash, and then it became like a tiger stripe, we just called it Tiger Lips around the shop internally. This was not intended to be an official name or a marketing title or anything. We just didn't know what else to call it, and I couldn't come up with anything witty before the public had heard it. So it became Tiger Lips, and it added a cool element to that specific kind of Vietnam conflict inspired knife, and it just took off. Like people really embraced it. And then one day I scratched one, and it's a dark acid finish, typically. I scratched one and I was like, well, this isn't going to work. I can't re-acid etch the stainless because I couldn't soak the solder joint or whatever in the acid. So I decided to polish it, and that became like our satin Tiger Lips, which is evolved, as the years have progressed into something that is a little bit aesthetically pleasing, although it does kind of fall into that purely aesthetics camp versus any improvement on performance. But yeah, so that's why we call it Tiger Lips. It's just Tiger Stripe Apocalypse Wash, and it all started back in the zombie craze.
It's like yeah, I mean, when you innovate into things, it's interesting to me how sometimes the public picks that up. But I mean, honestly, there is this weird. I'm kind of taking a tangent here, but to make a point, there are a bunch of people that think that when you're producing a knife, that a mono steel knife or something that's not Damascus or whatever, Sanmai, is worth less because it's just a single steel, right, a homogeneous steel. And I've never really understood that, because you still have to grind the same stuff. It's just it's not. Maybe it's like the post forged in fire, like everything that's like Damascus or blacksmiths or rare is inherently more valuable. But you kind of bridge this gap, as it were, where you provide the stability and assurability of a monosteel with a texturization that really is its own thing that you can't really achieve in Damascus or Sanmai, right? Like the idea, at least with adding embellishments. So I mean, at the end of the day, you have your blade or whatever, and you have your handle material, and you have whatever your like your guards and things like that, and then beyond that, you have whatever embellishments you do. So whether it's engraving or the kind of finish that you're putting on it or whatever, like to me, you add a lot of additional value to the look of it, the aesthetics of it, by putting on like tiger lips or some type of finish that's just not present in a high polish blade. Everybody likes high polish. Everybody likes satins that are executed well, but there is also something that's like this embellishment that is not Damascus, but really has the same kind of like a visual appeal of a Damascus or something like that too. So I mean, I all of your knives look fantastic by themselves, but they really look good with your tiger lips finish on too.
Thanks, Aaron. I appreciate it. The many frustrating hours fighting with ferric chloride, trying to get it to do its thing just right, and I mean many hours, and that's just my own ignorance on the subject. But once I kind of crack the code, the customers like it. They think it elevates the look, and I have to explain pretty frequently, especially on the dark tiger lips, the unpolished variant. Um, it, you meet, they go, "Oh, is this Damascus?" I'm like, "No, it's not." I'm like, "Oh, did you forge this?" And I'm like, "Well, technically, every knife is forged." I'm pretty sure that was Kevin Cashin's little nugget of wisdom. Some guys, bang it against an anvil. Mine gets forged at the mill. I receive a piece of forged steel. It's run through rollers and everything else to get everything, homogeneous into a consistent thickness and all that stuff. So I get to kind of skirt that issue and just shut it down because I don't believe in the competition between, bladesmiths and stock removal guys. Um, we're all kind of just playing the game the way we want to. But yeah, no, the tiger lips is it's like I said, I have to explain it to the uninitiated every once in a while. No, this isn't Damascus, but in my opinion, and not even just my opinion, these CPM steels are pretty amazing when it comes to performance, and they're gonna, you know, they may not be as pretty, but they are gonna outperform in a lab setting. Um, you know, layered steel, let's say. And I would say that the goal of a lot of layered steel, other than just aesthetics, is to even reach the capability of powdered steel metallurgy. And, that's, you look back at the Tamahagane of the Japanese swords, I mean, this is a refined steel and composition. So we're lucky enough that I can just, call Niagara and have them send it to me. So, yep.
Yeah. I Man, I don't know. I mean, I started off doing a little bit of like bladesmithing type of stuff when I got into it, but I there's a portion of me that really, I mean, I'll die on this hill that the difference between stock removal and bladesmithing is mysticism. Because if you really think about it, everyone who forges stock removes, and there's
Yes.
even in the science, like, so Larrin Thomas doing all of his heat treating and metallurgy studies inside of the vein of knives has been able to debunk some of the mysticism that has just been a part of bladesmithing for a long time. It's like, no, being in a particular orientation to the poles does not inherently make your heat treating better. Like, you don't have to.
What about edge packing?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it like, yeah. I mean, all those. Wasn't there something on Larrin's Instagram or something, like social media, where he was debunking edge packing? It was something really recently.
Good, possibly. I don't, and I said it was Kevin Cashin, but it was Larry that is the one that said that. That said they're all forged. So I just wanted to clear the record on that. But yeah, yeah. I don't know. I didn't see it, but it's pretty crazy, and we're lucky to really that book that he put out. I have a copy of it here. It was gifted to me by a customer, which was great. And you realize really how easy it is to come up with mysticism. Growing up in the Southwest, I'm from Arizona, born and raised. I live in Michigan now, but that's definitely my home. Um, we grew up around rattlesnakes, and a lot of them is a pretty common occurrence. I've dispatched a number of them, eaten them, and whatever. But there were all these remedies for snake bites, and they were mostly inaccurate because an adult, mature rattlesnake usually is going to hit you with a very low to zero venom dose, other than residuals, as a warning shot. The younger ones are a lot more potent. They give you everything they got in the first shot. But there were all these remedies for snake bites that people swore by because they were never actually affected by the venom. So it's this correlation versus causation thing. They think it worked, but there was nothing to solve. And I think in the mysticism of metallurgy, I think people get a good result, but they're attributing it to the wrong variable.
Yeah, there's a I'll probably misquote this, but it's like there's actually a paradigm. I think it's like the survivability paradigm where like so I think it was in World War II where they were like planes would come back and they would have holes in them and they're like, okay, wherever these holes are, we need to put plating in. And there was some mathematician, yeah, an
Engineer.
engineer that was
Yeah.
like, no, that's not, probably where these holes are is where it's less likely to cause catastrophic failure. We need to strengthen them in everywhere else. And that survivability paradigm or whatever is something that's like psychologically inherent in all of us, where we're like, the thing that has the owie is the thing that we protect, but maybe that what we're not focusing on is like all the things that are dying because of other things. And
Right. These ones all made it back for us to evaluate.
yeah,
So where did they not get shot? Because chances are those guys are in the
yeah.
drink. Yeah, totally. That was such a jaw dropping article or whatever. You know what I mean? When I saw that for the first time, I was like, your mind just expands when you see little gems like
Well,
that.
yeah, and I mean, honestly, it's the same way. It is the same way with knives, right? Like, there are so many things that you have to think about very linearly. But then when we get into like theoretical sides of knives, that's honestly where I geek out because Larrin does not suffer like fools very well. And there were times like there's a stock removal group on Facebook, and I think maybe one time, and I had read his book and I understand heat treating principles pretty well, and there was some area where I said something. He's like, actually, no, blah, blah, whatever. And I felt like, okay, the godfather of like knife metallurgy, like a published work like of our generation, is saying, no, I'm an idiot, in a very kind way of just saying like, no, that's not right. I was like, okay, well, maybe instead of me like making comments, I'm just going to let Larrin take care of it. But, you know, very fortunate for all of us that he's spending his life actually dedicated towards this vocation, because like maybe like I learn new stuff all the time when he posts stuff up and when he tests things, but future generations of knife makers will be able to kind of sift through the old wives' tales and really get down to what's like provable through scientific method, in order to be able to evaluate steels and heat treats and things like that, largely because of his work alone.
I think Laren's work, that tome that he put out, even aside from the individual testing and stuff that he does using his time, I think it's tantamount to hieroglyphs or cave drawings or something like that. Like it's something that future generations will look back on. It is leaps and bounds, and it is such a service, like you said, to this industry, especially at a time when this industry was just going haywire because of the TV shows and stuff. So it's no, I wonder if he realizes what a contribution that really is. Because I mean, as far as the historical record goes, it's a him publishing that book was a watershed moment. That's something any knife maker can look up the ISBN or whatever it is and just order it off Amazon or get it from wherever it comes from, and elevates their work. Even if I understand probably 4% of that whole book, but at least I'm learning what questions to ask and where to do deep dives and whatnot. But yeah, a significant contribution overall. I
Yeah,
agree.
I mean, if anybody's interested in this book, it's Knife Engineering by Dr. Larrin Thomas. It's steel, heat treating, and geometry. And I'm going to read out the ISBN, whatever. It's 979-862-184-8873. And you can find it on Amazon and everywhere. But one thing that I really like about it is I have every single steel that I regularly use tabbed out from the back, and I'll follow his heat treat recipes. And I have like never had a failure when I followed his recipes, which to me, that level of repeatability and consistency with what I'm doing on my Rockwell tester and everything has been invaluable to me. Like, I don't have to waste my time with the trial and error of heat treating because Larrin has done all of that for us.
Absolutely. Now, I was very fortunate that I got a little tribal passed down, and those who are familiar with my work know that I prefer CPM 154, which I know is not like the the tallest blue and red bar on the graph, but it has a tremendous performance value, and it's a stalwart steel in my opinion, and I love that steel in its every capacity. But I got a tribal heat treat recipe, from a well-respected maker who got it from a very well-respected maker also. So, and then I got the book. And so I was like, oh, let's see, where are we at with this? And so I looked at it and I was like, okay, great. I mean, I'm right there. And so it was validating in that sense. Although I use his book when I have odd orders, you know what I mean? Because he gives with cryo, without cryo, cryogenic treatment, sub-zero quench even, or whatever it is, different variations on it. And I am not the metallurgist in the family, that's for sure. But yeah, no, such a valuable resource. And my book is already so gross just from thumbing through it with shop hands, with grimy shop hands. It's definitely a lifesaver when you get those oddball, oh, I want this out of this steel, because it's reliable.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think like the idea, well, I mean, if we think about this episode, like I kind of want to frame this for people, is that I think that the reason I wanted to have Matt on is because he and I both ideologically agree that we ride on the shoulders of giants, right? And if you look at Matt's work, he figures out so many things himself, but he also has had a lot of benefit from talking to some really smart people. And I'm the same way. Like, I don't know that I would have the same perseverance like on Bruce Bump's episode, which just released this previous time. This cut and shoot stuff that he's done. There, cut and shoots have been around for a long time, but the modern cut and shoot and how he pulls together gun barrels and makes his own mechanisms and puts blades on it and things like that are something that he's really pioneered in the modern age. And he thinks almost nothing about it, but he had to research everything from scratch because there was no living knife makers that I'm aware of that could impart any of that knowledge for him. So he had to go through, how do you actually get from this cool picture or this like idea of a cut and shoot to actually making these things? You know what I mean? And I just think that we're at the genesis of knife making, where we can really just rely on each other for knowledge sharing, and it's so much easier than it was back in the day.
Totally. And to underscore that point, I mean, I'm a self-taught maker. I began this endeavor in the mountains, at the base of the Mogollon Rim in Arizona, and that I didn't have access to anything. We barely had internet, and that was touch and go, and pretty late coming in my time there also. So I was self-taught until you get older and more mature in your career, and then you start hanging out with other knife guys. Before I was an island, and that's when you get kind of the nuances, you know what I mean, where they're willing to share some of the heat treat recipes, which are guarded like mom's marinara sauce. And but the cool part about it is you see people like Bruce, and you see even people like Tyler, who's obnoxiously young for the level, Tyler Turner, obnoxiously young for the level of talent he has. And you go, hey, man, no matter, I still feel like a kid in this game. I am still like junior varsity, if even, maybe peewee, and so there is this a new goal, this new horizon that shows up that says, man, in my later years, after I have accrued this much knowledge, then I can start delving into more complex things. And I'm already starting to get a taste for it and a thirst for it, rather, not even a taste, just like this. Just like I want to go farther, and the sky is the limit when it comes to knife making. I mean, you can go in any direction as far off the reservation as you want, and start adding mechanisms. I am getting ready to try a takedown dagger. I've never done that before, so I'm like, oh, this would be cool, having just a bunch of components that seamlessly fit together. And that's one that I'm really looking forward to. And I'm not doing a lot of research on it. I probably should, but I'm looking forward to solving that problem. That's where the hunger is, the insatiable hunger is in how can I solve that problem? And if I hit a wall that I can't overcome, then I'll start probably reaching out. But it's nice to know people like the Bruce still exist. There's a name that's escaping me right now. He does some amazing takedown work. And I have intentionally not looked at his page because I don't want to skip any steps in the creative process, I guess, in that case. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, on takedown buoys, especially Kyle Royer has done a lot of good work, and documented it pretty well online. But Tyler Turner, for instance, like I've met him a few times. He's a real cool guy. But the thing I love about him is that he's kind of like the John Mayer of knife making. Like he's so eclectic, but it seems like everything that he touches is just like wow factor. And I've really enjoyed that because it just doesn't matter. Like whatever he wants to make, whatever's in his mind's eye, he just does an immaculate job at it. And if there's people that want to like look at somebody who can really just pinch hit in any type of direction, it's him. And I don't, he's just like a savant when it comes to that. I mean, it's just, he exudes talent.
And I mean, you want to talk about a guy who is outwardly like devoid of ego. He's just a beam of light in every room that he walks in. He's happy. He's upbeat. He's not, you can walk through Blade Show. You're going to run into a couple of tough guys that are just like, hey, these are killing tools and, all this other thing. You know what I mean? Regardless of the intent of the knife design, historically speaking, you have this tough guy mentality, which I really can't stand. And then you meet Tyler and you think he's in the wrong building. I mean, he doesn't have a bunch of stuff hanging off his backpack. There's no Molly straps on his cargo shorts. I mean, he's just like a regular dude. Like you said, like the John Mayer, he's just so amiable. And then he's like, oh, I dabble in some stuff, and I'm working on one. This one's kind of cool, and your mind is blown. You're like, you're a friggin' wizard, dude. And yeah, I like Tyler a lot. I was really glad to meet him at the Hammer Inn, the Midwest Knife Makers Guild get together over at Tracy's place, and Tyler and I struck it off. We hit it off immediately. And what a guy! What a hell of a maker, though. I mean, I wish that could get cloned. I wish we could have this lack of ego, again, lack of gatekeeping, lack of tough guy attitude, killer attitude. Save that for when the time comes that you have to be that individual, but it has no place at the table at Blade. You know what I mean? So like he's doing it right. I think he's a good example to watch.
Yeah. Well, this is your interview, and I kind of want to like just bring that point home that you're also that way, right? I mean, I love being able to talk to people who are just generous with their time, generous with who they are, genuinely as a person, and exude the light and passion, right? And you're just one of those. Like from the moment I started talking with you, I just knew that you were somebody who I wanted to talk to, and it's been a pleasure, even on the periphery, because we don't get to talk all the time. But just to be able to, in some way, be a part of the thing that you've created. So, kind of with that being said, the last question we typically ask people on this podcast is if there's specific type of advice that you can give to like new or upcoming makers, other than the wealth of everything that you've already talked about. Like what are the high points? Is there some inspirational message that you can give to those kind of people that are listening?
Well, I mean, first off, thanks, Aaron. I appreciate the kind words. I always find you very easy to talk to. So whenever we see each other at shows, like I look forward to it, and I definitely appreciate it coming from you because I have a tremendous respect for you. But if I was going to give advice, this is frustrating for all of us. Like every one of us has hair pulling moments. Every one of us is getting orange peel or a solder joint that isn't flowing. Whatever it is, or some reason like that, the belt edge is not providing the same plunge line from reverse to obverse. We all go through it, and I think the most skillful makers make it look like you pushed a button and a perfect knife came out, but the reality is there's a lot of frustration that goes through that. So any new maker who isn't living up to a goal that they may not achieve for like 10 years, don't kick your own because you're not there yet. This is a path. This is not a destination. And we're every day we are solving problems. So from the pros to the amateurs to the neophytes, it is just stick with it. And in doing that, be honest with who you are and don't try to live up to the image of somebody, even if you admired them, because if it's not your image, you'll be insincere. You'll never develop that culture, which is what sells your knives. And or worse, they give up when they had tremendous potential. They just don't realize that it takes time and it's immeasurable. You know what I mean? Like the progress, you can't really see it in real time, but with the one good thing about social media, if you look back on your catalog of work, you'll see the improvement, and that is the chase, right? And we're in it for the chase. So that's if I was going to say anything, it would just be don't give up, man. From the best makers to the guy who just got his first belt grinder this week, it's frustrating for all of us, but it's the thrill of the hunt that keeps us going. So just don't give up.
Yeah, no, I mean those are really inspirational words, and I'm going to like underpin that by saying, you know, we think oftentimes that when somebody has arrived that they've always been that way, right? Like you take the epitome of people's life work or their energy, and you say, "Oh, right, they've always been that way. They're just naturally talented. Like you have a God given gift or whatever." But I really think that human potential is that way, right? And I'll use it for instance, like I've been told that I'm a good writer. I don't really know that I believe that so much. I've written a lot though, and when I was real young, I did not read very well. Even until I was like 10 or 11, I just like, there was just some part of me that I was like, I just don't really care for this much. I mean, I could read basically, but not well. And I could not write worth a lick. And my grandfather told me when I was young, he said, Aaron, if you can read, you can teach yourself anything. Right. And this is a guy who grew up with, I don't know, he was like one of 11 kids. His dad died when he was super young, and he had to work in like the steel factories and whatnot in order to help the family make enough money to feed the family. He was in World War II. He was a mechanic. Outside of that, he was a farmer in many different capacities and a truck driver. Like he's this a jack of all trades, right? And I don't mean that in like the pejorative sense. Like he just knew so much, and he did that through educating himself, like every day. And as I started to like develop in reading and writing and whatnot, I realized that he was right. Like you have to be able to stick with it. And people might say that you're naturally talented, but man, I don't know. Like it almost uh, makes me feel like people weren't around for all that suffering that I've done to get to the place where I could write well. And it's the same way with knives. Like you'll never know the struggles that a person goes through internally or with their craft to get to where they are. But just know that there is a story behind that. And remember that you can write your own story as well. I mean, so it's a perfect point. I mean, I live that every day.
I couldn't agree more. In fact, I take umbrage with saying that I have natural skill whenever somebody says that. I know they mean it in a complimentary sense, so I don't like lash out at them or whatever. But my excuse me, my God-given gift is obstinance. Like that's really what it is stubbornness to just keep going. It's not knife making because God knows that has been one arduous step after another. But because I'm so stubborn, eventually achieved some level of competency, right? So yeah, no, I think you're totally right. If you can read, and in today's world, if you can search YouTube, there's a lot on there, I mean? So, I mean, there's so many resources available, and I don't want to make it sound like, well, in our day, we had it so much harder. It's just that take advantage of the resources that are out there, solve the problems as they present themselves, try to do it on your own first. And when you hit a wall, don't be afraid to research. You know what I mean? That's why people document this stuff. People like Larrin, you know what I mean? That's they put it there not as a crutch, but as a step to get higher, to elevate the craft as a whole. So yeah, no, I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, tenacity is the name of the game. And if you can be tenacious and you can have a little bit of endurance, and you'll take yourself a lot farther. I think everybody has a God-given potential, and it's up to us to realize that through the slog. And maybe some point in time you look back and you say, hey, I didn't do too bad, but you got to stick with it in order to be able to realize it in the first place, right? So we're in lockstep with that kind of ideology.
Absolutely.
Well, Matt, it's been a pleasure. I'm gonna let you go, but just anytime you want to come on, you're more than welcome, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you.
I forgot that we were even recording, Aaron. It just felt like we were rapping, in the smoke pit behind the Blade Show. So no, this was an absolute blast. I appreciate it, and I look forward to coming back again.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.